There was a moment when Y2K Goth music got silver and shiny and a little more dancey, and then it almost disappeared overnight. If you grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, you might remember this sound. Or maybe you missed it completely. Before emo took over, before nu metal burned itself out, there was a brief moment where rock music turned a little detached, a little synthetic, and a little fashion forward. I lived in LA during this era and I can remember it specifically. I can still see guys in silver shadow and vinyl pants that are silver. I don't know why silver always reminds me of it. You know that moment when Smashing Pumpkins decided they were goth and then they wore all that silver shit? Well, there's actually a subcultural scene that was associated with that had nothing to do with Smashing Pumpkins. I lived in LA, I played in bands, I've seen the music, I love and I live for this. So instead of being really a nerdy deep dive into a genre of music, this is more like my sort of, I guess, memories and just cultural experience I remember from this time period and this specific sound. And today I want to talk about that Y2K music genre most people didn't even realize had a name, but it was called Undercore. Undercore really wasn't like a scene. It didn't have rules. There was no specific nightclub. It didn't have like a fixed audience. It was a term that was coined by the band Deadsy that I will be talking about today. But at the time, it didn't really feel like branding. It was more like a password. It was like too strange for the radio and too icy for the Hot Topic crowd. It was cold and it was glossy and it was like emotionally distant. Very much how I felt when I was in my mid-20s, but it was sonically rich, and it pulled from like goth and glam and sci-fi aesthetics, and that is definitely, if you kind of were around that era and you maybe grew up a little bit in the goth scene or you grew up in a little bit of like the glam scene, you were gravitated towards this particular sound. And while everything else was like loud and angry and bleeding on stage, Undercore didn't bleed, it like shimmered. If you found it, it felt like you found a secret order, and if you didn't find it, you don't know it existed at all. And this kind of happened before that whole Cyber Goth had a name too. So when a lot of people might associate this like, oh, with like futuristic goth, they think of like the cyber movement. But this was kind of before that. So it still had a little bit of a rock glam edge to it. I don't really equate, I mean, maybe this kind of genre is what sort of sparked that way, that sort of futuristic vibe that sort of happened in the Y2K is kind of like what a few years later enveloped that style. But I don't know. I don't really feel like the two are that related. Let me know if you do, or if that kind of like, if either of these genres were tied together for you. Because it wasn't like rave forward. It was more like for a rock club. It was more for like a live show. But it might have definitely had the DNA that could spark the future cyber movement. This was an era where a movie like Matrix kind of redefined what exactly dark meant. It wasn't necessarily all black. That's where shiny came in, and silver and future, vinyl, chrome, synthetics, all of that kind of slid out of the underground into the mainstream. And if you were goth or goth adjacent, this music danced, and that was how we knew it was around. Kind of how that 80s sound signals nostalgia now, back then it kind of signaled futuristic. So today I'm going to talk about just a few bands that I kind of feel are of this genre, and I will definitely end on Deadsy, which is the band that coined the term. But let's go through a few other bands first, and then we'll end with the architects of the style. Number one is Orgy. I call them the gateway, because they were the first band that I kind of heard of this genre, the first one that everyone I knew was talking about. They used the words like satellite and electronic and circuit in their music. It was so futuristic. I also saw them live a few times, and I was in LA, so Orgy was one of those bands. One of those bands where everybody knew somebody in the band and had some sort of connection. They were close enough to be familiar, and you know, you go out and you hang out at a nightclub and you're just like, oh, it's so-and-so from Orgy over there. But, you know, they're still big enough to carry that sort of rock star aroma to them. I saw them live a few times, and I remember one show specifically in San Francisco, and I believe it was at Maritime Hall. And they were actually the headliners for the night, and the opening band was Linkin Park, who at the time we hadn't really heard of. Like literally, they were like on the verge. And it was funny because at that show, the majority of the people there were there for Linkin Park, but my girlfriend and I, you know, we were goth kids. We knew about Orgy, and we were like, Well, what is up with this rappy music? And everybody is like really into it. That's why I do not like popular music, apparently, because I cannot pick it out of the crowd. But yeah, so, you know, Orgy, they weren't really nu metal. They weren't really industrial. They had a Blue Monday cover, so they were definitely poppy and kind of dabbling into that new wave music of the 80s. But they were sleek, they were poised, they were emotionally unavailable. Everything that all of us in the late 90s strived to be. It felt like live music for goths that also like to go to the clubs. And their music is so locked into a very specific point in time. If you have not heard the song Dreams in Digital, you must give it a listen because it literally is a timestamp. The second band I want to talk about is a band I've already talked about before called TheSTART. Now, I'm bringing this up as a sort of a connector band, and I will find a way to bring them up into any conversation. I was there when they would stare at you just like the light had fallen. They leaned into sort of a post-punk, kind of dance music, stylish way that felt really intentional, but not like retro. And here's the connective tissue. There's a rare song by them called Sin Original, featuring Jay Gordon from Orgy on that song. So every time I hear that song, it also like gives me that Orgy timestamp again, because it gives me that very Y2K feel of that sound of synth and orgy. It's not widely known song. It's not algorithm friendly, but sonically, I really feel that it ties into the undercore genre. But definitely the dance and the synth and the kind of like goth adjacent stuff that we all crave. So check them out as well. Another band I want to mention is not a band that I was necessarily a huge fan of, but always make me think of this particular period of time, and that's Snake River Conspiracy. I call them the time machine because every time I hear a song by them, I'm just transported back to that era, back to my early 20s, like that. Most people know them because they have a cover of How Soon Is Now, and I mean, who doesn't love a cover of a good Smith song? And sure, that's the entry point, but their entire vibe is Y2K atmosphere. Every time I hear them, I time travel. You know when you hear a song and it literally takes you back and just like you can almost grab that memory, or you could almost feel who you were back then or the room you were in. That band does it for me. They might be slightly outside of the term undercore, but they definitely give me that vibe, and they definitely are a time machine back to that era. And all of this, every band I mentioned, all kind of orbit around one group that didn't just embody the sound, they actually coined the phrase. And if you think you've already heard of Deadsy, stay with me, because I kind of didn't understand them either. And then I realized everything I thought was wrong. Deadsy, the Architects. I didn't appreciate Deadsy at the time. I was living in LA, specifically Santa Monica, at the era of Deadsy. And I was into Orgy, of course. You know, they were like club guys. You know, everybody knew them. They were part of the scene. Now, Deadsy nobody knew unless you were like in the Nepo Baby scene. And I was very much like one of those people who, I don't understand. I moved to LA, I lived in Hollywood, and then all I did was be like, anti-celebrity, anti-movie style, anti-community, anti-everything that makes that. I mean, I guess that's what being subcultural is, right? You put yourself into a situation where you're saturated by something and then you go, I fucking hate all of this bullshit. So the Nepo Baby narrative, I was a little snotty about it. We're talking Elijah Sky Blue Allman, the son of Cher and Greg Allman. So obviously I was like, yeah, I don't know about all this. I remember driving from Santa Monica to Hollywood one night to go to the Rainbow. And apparently Deadsy was playing at the Roxy, which was right next door. The parking lots were full. And I was like, why are there so many people out here? And I ran into a woman who owned a clothing store in Santa Monica. She was kind of nice, but she was very LA. And she's walking in with her like low-cut leather hip hugger pants. And I see her, I'm like, what are you doing over here on this side of town? Because to see someone from Santa Monica and Hollywood was very rare. And she's like, oh, I'm here to see my friend's band. And I was like, oh, well, good for you. I just rolled my eyes at Deadsy. I had no idea. I didn't see the color-coded identities, which the symbols, the mythos, all of those things that they had built. To me, I was just like, why are they not wearing black if they're kind of goth? Like, what's up with this preppy, weird look? I didn't get there was a whole story behind it. And story aside, characters aside, the whole way they kind of created like Kiss-like characters of themselves. I mean, that definitely spoke to a generation. I did not come from the Kiss generation. So to me, I was kind of like, what are you doing? But when I finally gave them a real listen, my mind was blown. Elijah's voice carries both a bass and a depth that feels both inherited and earned. There is a lineage there and you can hear it.
Was it meant to be starved?
And interestingly enough, to bring Jay Gordon from Orgy back into the mix again, kind of like how he played on a TheSTART album, he actually played bass on the first Orgy album because apparently they didn't have a bass player and he knew them, and there you go. So we're still keeping it all together. It's still a pot. And Deadsy was not really a moment. I think they were, looking back now, the best expression of this genre. I think what really changed me was the time I heard the live version of the song Carrying Over.
Don't you know that this thing's real love? Baby, I'm waiting to go.
His voice literally almost brought me to tears the first time I heard that. And I was hoping for a moment for Deadsy to come back because I did miss that. Because I was being so snotty at the time, I wasn't paying attention to one of the best bands that actually existed and really defined a brief moment in music history. They almost were going to come back and make a new album, and I thought I was going to have a chance to see them live. I thought maybe I would get a chance to hear Elijah's voice in person. But apparently that all fell apart, and my husband always points out that once the keyboardist left, he realized it was all over. Apparently they were going to release Commencement on vinyl as well, and did a pre-sale for that, and then the album never came out. I don't know. It's just one of those stories again, the sad story of the band you want so bad to come back and they just can't get it together. But in general, I guess the whole undercore didn't really fail. It just got drowned out. Emo took over, and that raw emotion sort of overcarried the aesthetic of distance. Blood replaced chrome, and this genre, which was too restrained and too stylish, just slipped through the cracks. If you remember this era, tell me. If this is brand new to you, you're welcome. I've got links, playlists, and related videos down below. Watching those and checking those out helps support this channel. If you want more deep dives into goth culture, Y2K, 90s, anything that shaped us, stick around. And I will see you on the next one, listening to Deadsy.
On the other side of the undercity, to the boulevard.